Hello, hello, Thriving Therapist Collective. Therapists out there, I'm here today with Emily Ferguson, the founder of Confident Private Practice. Emily is a super duper awesome human being who helps mental health practice owners achieve business confidence. So what does that mean? That means, and I'll let you introduce yourself in a sec, but at the highest level, Emily offers business coaching to practices of all sizes. She utilizes her experience running the day-to-day operations of multiple therapy practices, working with practice owners to grow their business, reduce their stress, save time and money, and become financially stable. And I love so much about this too, especially like the whole, I work with a lot of practice owners, and there's just this stress and this just like, what do I do next? And what are the steps and what's the framework to do? And you help them with that, and it's a wonderful gift to have someone that they can trust. And at Goodman Creatives, we work with a lot of solo practice owners who are excited about this dream of going to group practice. But there are so many steps in between being a solo practice owner and having the idea of going group and actually starting that group practice, hiring your first associate, your contractor, your W-2, millions of questions. And that is what we are going to talk about today, or rather Emily is going to talk about today, is how do you go from solo to group? What are all the things that people don't know that they should know, things that people should be thinking about? But first, I want to pass it over to you. That was the little intro, but maybe what would you like to share to everybody watching this at the start?
I just want to say thank you, Greg, for having me here. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and to find out all the great work that you're doing for therapists as well. And I'm just really excited that we could do this together. And yeah, like you were saying, a lot of solo practices, they have the ambition, the drive, the excitement to move to group practice. They know that it would help them financially, and then they're just not sure quite how to get there. Hiring might sound really intimidating, and then they know they're going to need to do more marketing to bring in more clients. And so, of course, that's where you come in. But there's so many things, so many questions, and so many things that they haven't even realized are questions yet. And so that's what I really want to touch on today, is just 10 things to think about when you're moving from solo to group practice, and kind of get those wheels turning so they can either figure out if they're ready to move to group practice, or figure out what they need to do so that they can get ready.
Awesome. And would you be open to sharing just a little bit about your background? Like, what was really, I thought, fascinating about your background, in addition to the coaching and all of that, was, the matter that you do have this experience in running the day-to-day operations of multiple therapy practices, group practices. So, you've got this experience. So what did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I started out, I did operations management for some e-commerce businesses. And then I really wanted to get away from like selling t-shirts, because there's not really anything fulfilling in that. And so I took a job as an intake coordinator for a therapy practice, because I really love mental health. Like I've benefited in my own life from therapy. My family has benefited. And so starting right from the ground up, getting all that intake coordinator experience. I was a really good intake coordinator, had a high conversion rate, and I was helping a practice owner who had just hired her first therapist. And we moved that practice from basically solo practice to now she has 6 therapists in the practice. I'm
Yes.
still with her doing the operations management. And then I also do operations management for another practice as well, another small group practice. And so I'm in the day-to-day of these practices. Started out with intake coordination, moved into practice management for her, then operations management. So now we have a different intake coordinator and practice manager there. And so now, yeah, the operations management piece, I've just done everything business related, anything non-clinical that you can think of, and even some of the having to help with setting policies on the clinical side. I've done it. And so I took that into my business coaching, and that's where all of that business coaching advice comes from. And so I think that is a really important piece for a business coach, is you can go to school for business, and you can learn a lot of really basic skills, but there is a difference between somebody who's actually done it and somebody who hasn't. And then there's a difference between someone who's actually done it for a therapy practice. And so I really love to bring that experience to my business coaching clients.
Yeah, that's absolutely to all of it. And it's true. The difference so often, general business therapy is such, I mean, obviously, everybody watching this, the business of therapy is so different than any other any other business out there, even within healthcare, it's there's so many unique nuances to what clients need, what therapists need as a business owner, as an empathetic human being who's providing mental health care. And there's so much that needs to be addressed and understood. So that's why you're here, because you do understand those things. And two, I think it's great that you have that experience as an intake coordinator too. Like specifically, like that is such a critical role that I think, and maybe you're going to go into this, so I don't want to jump into what you're sharing, but the role of hiring a really good intake coordinator is, you know, as from the marketing side, like it's relatively easy to get leads, but converting those leads into clients, that's where the real magic happens. And it's hard enough for a solo practice owner. Then you do that at scale, and all of a sudden you're responsible for, 2, 3, 10, 20, 50, however many folks, lives, jobs, and all of that. It's a whole other thing. And so much of that hinges on the intake coordinator. And that you've had success in that, I think, speaks volumes to what you bring to your clients. And I think what you're going to share, might as well get started on that.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'd love to get started on that. I'll just go ahead and screen share here.
You're in for a treat, everybody. I'm going to sit back and let Emily present what she's great at.
All right, here we go. So 10 things to think about when you're moving from solo to group practice. And Greg, I just want to confirm you are seeing the slideshow
I'm
there,
seeing
right?
you. Yep.
Okay, perfect. I love when technology works.
Nice.
Um, Okay. So first one that this is where I like to start with my business coaching clients is on that foundational business piece. And this is so important because therapists, you go to school, you get your master's degree, maybe even your PhD, you probably didn't get a lot of education and training on the business side of running a private practice. So we really start at that foundation, looking at your vision and your mission, like get really clear on why you even started this business in the first place. What is your mission? Who are you helping? Because you can't help everyone in the whole world. Who are you specifically helping? And how is hiring going to help you meet your goals? So make sure that the goals that you're laying out can actually be helped by moving towards a group practice, and then that you're not just kind of doing it without enough forethought. And then some of the things we go into with that foundational business work is your ideal client avatar. And so this is, I'm sure something that you work with, Greg, or something similar for nailing down who am I speaking to in my messaging? What are their presenting issues? How do they feel now? How do they feel after they work with you? And just running all of that content that you're going to put out in the future through the lens of asking, is it going to resonate with that client? And this isn't meant to limit you. I like to think of this like a target where you're shooting your arrow at the center, which is your ideal client. But, if you say, I really love working with women in their 40s, that doesn't mean you can never take on a male client, right? It just means you're going to kind of speak to the person that has the presenting issues that you're best equipped to help and that you really enjoy. And then we've got SWOT analysis. So SWOT just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is what we look at to get a really realistic picture of where your business is right now and where some opportunities for growth. And that's all part of a business plan. Your marketing plan is part of your business plan. And so there's a lot more pieces to that, obviously, that we can't cover today. But some of that foundational business work is where I like to have people start off.
Quick curiosity, when you do a SWOT, are you looking just internally? Are you looking at the local competitors as well, other group practices, other folks in the niche,
Yeah, that's a great question. So of course, strengths and weaknesses are the internal factors and the opportunities and threats are the external factors. I focus mostly on the internal factors, though we will take a brief look at opportunities, what's trending overall. For example, during COVID, everybody's doing virtual sessions. So I'm like, hey, that's an opportunity, you guys, right? Like if you can't afford to get an office space, you're probably fine just doing virtual sessions. There's an opportunity. Threats, if we're looking at, I work almost exclusively with 100% private pay practices, but some of my practices are like have one foot in the insurance world and one foot in the private pay world. And so, if the threats are insurance is paying less, and I'm like, well, let's move more towards the private pay. So we look a little bit of that at that, but not as in depth as the internal pieces.
Awesome.
Okay, so step two, do you have a team in place? Marketing, of course, this would be Greg. Um, you want to have your marketing piece in place before you hire, because of course you're going to need to be getting more clients, more leads into the practice before you hire, so that you can fill up their schedules. Your bookkeeper and your accountant. I know some solo practices, like your mom is really good at math, and so she's helping you out on this end. And that's fine in the beginning. But as you grow, if you're really going to need somebody who can advise you, and so unless your mom is an accountant, you're going to need to hire somebody on that side. The admin and intake coordinator piece. So this can be one person usually in the beginning, though as the practice grows, this usually splits out into like an intake coordinator and a practice manager and maybe an operations manager. But in the beginning, this can be one person. You could even call them a virtual assistant. And I'm going to talk more about the importance of that here in a few minutes, but I'll just say that this is the person who can take things off your plate that don't require a master's degree. So when you're thinking about what could I delegate, it's those things. And then business coach, I'm just going to do a shameless plug for myself here. You need someone walking alongside you who knows the pitfalls of where you're going, what you're going to encounter before you encounter them, and help you avoid them. So that's going to save you countless hours, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of dollars to just have a clear path to group practice ownership before you can start.
And I think just it's so the differentiation between like the marketing coach, the business coach, like these are such different things. And I've just heard a lot of confusion, like, oh, the marketing is going to do all the business things. And it's so different. Like the service that you provide and that a business coach provides is just, as you're seeing in this presentation, this isn't marketing, this is business. And there's a big difference between the two.
Right. Yeah. And I run into that as well because I help with a little bit on the marketing piece, but then get into an area where I'm like, nope, that's where you need the marketing coach. That's where you need the person who can run your ads, build your website, all of those things that I don't do. So yeah,
Yeah.
they are very, very different roles. Okay, so number three, do you have some basic systems and processes in place? So I'm actually going to break this out into three different areas where you'll want to have some systems and processes. But if you're feeling scattered now, you're going to feel so much more scattered and stressed when you hire. So we want to make sure that you're feeling ready for that. You don't have to have everything perfect. You don't need to think of every scenario, but you want to make sure that the process of receiving clients and getting your to-do list done and locating the information that you need when you need it is all running pretty smoothly. So on the intake side, that would be, credit cards are getting on file, no outstanding balances, auto pay. Are clients filling out their forms? Who's following up on that? Because as a solo practice, that might be you, but maybe that's a place to hire your intake coordinator. And clients are getting a quick response with clear answers. Clients are converting. So that's all part of that intake coordinator piece too, where right now you might just be doing it by yourself. You're not getting a ton of leads in, and maybe you feel like you can handle just doing a consultation call and then setting everybody up yourself. But you want that process running really smoothly, and having that intake admin person handling that for you is really key there. And then you've got your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. So this is just, can I easily find what I need when I need it? I have one place where information lives. I never have to ask the same question twice. So that just means as things come up, as you solve problems and as you answer questions, that information goes into one place. It doesn't need to be anything super fancy, though there are some tools out there like Waybook that I like. But this can seriously just be a Google Doc. Just have the information somewhere, know where you can find it, and don't keep asking the same question. Just plug in the answers when you answer them.
What are some examples of like SOP topics that someone might want to create?
Oh, let's see. Well, like on the intake side, you want to have your process of booking your clients. What forms need to be sent out. You want to have policies, like if clients have an outstanding balance, what's the process there for getting that covered. Email templates are really great, because then again, you don't have to type the same thing over and over. And then like on the clinician side, we usually break out two different SOPs. So one on the admin side and one on the clinician side. And so, you can start building out frequently asked questions that come up there, any like policies around payroll, workplace, who's the building manager? And, if I have a problem with the office, how do I get a hold of the building manager? All of those kinds of things.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, and then the third one there is you're tracking some basic metrics. So this is just a very, very bare bones, couple of examples of some metrics to track. And as a solo practice, you certainly don't have to be tracking everything in the world. And there's definitely some key performance indicators that are more important than other metrics. But you should be tracking some things. So on the marketing side, knowing how many leads you have coming in, referral sources just means where are those leads coming from, what kind of keywords are working well. And then on the financial side, you know what your revenue is, your profit, your acquisition cost, just some real basic understanding of your P&L that your accountant should be sending you. You have your expenses dialed in. You're not spending crazy money on things that you didn't even realize that you were subscribed to. And then your own performance. So track your own retention rate, your own cancellation rate. When you hire that intake coordinator, track her conversion rate. And yeah, just there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of metrics, but you want to make sure that you have a place to start tracking some of those things. Okay, and then number 4 is you're feeling good about your own time management skills. So, some folks are just kind of naturally organized. They have some things in place that they already do in their personal life that they bring into being a solo practice owner. But some folks, and sometimes it's therapist personality. We tend to be more emotionally connective and doing all those things that us business people struggle with, right? The emotional connection, that human to human relationship. And so sometimes some of those time management things can be more of the left brain things that can be tricky. And so getting your time management locked in can be really important, because once you're running a group practice and you're the boss, you're just going to have so much more on your plate. I will also say, though, that with the right team in place, having a group practice can mean doing less work than you're doing now eventually. You can have a smaller caseload. You can have your administrative staff and your clinical lead running the day-to-day of the business. But it's going to take some time to work to get there. And so if time management feels like a barrier, then we want to build some tools. And one of the things I help my solo practice coaching clients do is look at their schedules and make sure that how they're spending their time actually aligns with their values, their priorities, and the goals that we've set. And so I get right there in the nitty gritty with them and their calendar, and help them make sure that their time makes sense. Okay, so if you're feeling like some of those pieces are already falling into place, maybe you feel like you've done that foundational business building work, but you're just too stressed or you have too much on your plate, then the next step is hiring admin support. And the admin support is going to help you with the time management piece and getting those systems and processes in place. So I'd like to have solo practice owners hire their admin support before they hire their first therapist, because that admin or intake coordinator can handle helping them build those SOPs. Instead of writing the SOP yourself, all you have to do is say, hey, make sure that gets in the SOP. Oh, I answered a question, make sure we get that in the SOP, right? And that's their job to keep up on that. Researching and comparing products. So this can be things like, we need a new phone system. Which one should we go with? Your admin is going to lay out a spreadsheet and all the pros and cons of the different ones and just help you make a decision. And then, of course, there's the intake coordination piece, scheduling, client communication, light marketing tasks, like they can upload your blog posts, your social media posts, prep your newsletter, any filing and record keeping. So again, it just comes back to finding the information that you need when you need it. If they have a good system, they can kind of be your right brain, or your left brain, the left side, of doing some of that type of work. And then your calendar management, so they can help you with that as well.
Awesome.
Okay, so the sixth, wow, number 6, that thing to think about. How many leads are you receiving, and is your own caseload full? So there's two ways to think about this, and I don't think there's one right answer. It's just what feels right for you in your stage of life and the goals that you're trying to meet. So if your own caseload is full, and you're building a wait list, then you might feel like, okay, it's time to hire because I know that I can get clients to fill I know I can get clients to fill my therapist's caseload, right? And short term, you're going to make more money having your own caseload full now. And then when you hire, the profit from that first hire is just going to be like some supplemental income for you. So if you're really feeling the pinch, like I need the income right now, then you might want to go ahead and talk to Greg, get your leads rolling in, and get your marketing locked in so that you can fill up your own caseload right now. But the other way to think about it is if your own caseload is full, you probably don't have time to be a practice owner. So you could hire now while your marketing is still ramping up with the expectation that caseloads build over time. So when you're interviewing people, let them know you're in private practice, caseloads build slowly. How does that feel? Do you feel like you need a full caseload right this minute? If they do, they might want to go to a community clinic, not a private practice. But of course, as you're working with the right marketing person, then, that's easier. But long term, you're going to make more money by hiring several therapists and then just focusing on being the business owner. So if you're feeling like, hey, my caseload is half full right now and financially that's okay, because within the next 3 months, 6 months, year, I'm going to hire, 1 to 3 therapists. And then I know that I can get their caseloads full or, at least get them rolling. I'm going to make, I've got all my financial projections laid out. We know I'm going to make a profit from that. Then if you can wait, that's really the better way to go because it frees up more of your time to be the business owner. Okay, so if you're at that point, you're ready to hire, then here's a few things to think about with that. Are you ready to be the boss? So one of the biggest issues I see when I work with group practices is that the people that the practice owner hired back in the day, years ago, they see the practice owner as like their friend or their buddy. And they'll often resist change that would be good for the practice as a whole. Like as the practice owner is noticing, hey, we need to put some policies in place. Hey, the way we've been doing things isn't really working. There's sometimes some resistance there because like this is the way we've always done it. And practice owners a lot of times let their first hires do whatever they want. They'll set their own schedules. They might not follow up with clients. Maybe they have terrible retention rates. They might not participate in business building things. So it's hard to change those patterns later. And I'm not saying that you can't be friendly or collaborative. You can definitely be a really good leader, a warm and connective leader. You can be an ethical employer, all of those things, and do build a team culture of trust and communication where people are empowered to do their best job. They're empowered to utilize their strengths. But at the end of the day, it is your business. It's your money on the line, and it's okay to have workplace policies and expectations right from the start. And so just having seen that pitfall from other group practice owners and seeing how they really struggle to get those therapists who've been with them for a long time to get them on board with changes, I would say just start out right from the beginning, track performance, set policies, boost up your leadership and your team building skills, and just be okay with sometimes making the hard decisions. And then, of course, part of being the boss is people are relying on you for their income. So if you're ready to be at that level, then you're ready to hire. Now, number 8 to think about is if hire someone who aligns with your ICA, that's your ideal client avatar that we talked about earlier, someone who also brings new skills to the practice. So if you've done that foundational business building work, you know who your ideal client is, you're speaking to them in your marketing. You don't want to have to speak to someone entirely different now because of this new therapist that you brought onto the practice. So you probably hire someone who's the same licensure type. That's not required, but of course, if you're supervising them, it may or may not be, depending. But usually just someone who's along the same lines, the same thought. Think of it as, could I just transfer at least half of my caseload to this person? is kind of a good way of looking at that. And then you also want to hire somebody who does do something that you don't do. So you don't want to just hire a replica of yourself, but somebody who has another modality. Maybe they speak another language, or they have some kind of experience with some specialty that you don't have. For example, you might hire somebody who tends to see the same clients as you. Maybe your practice works with a lot of trauma. You do EMDR. This person does IFS or somatic, right? So you're still working with those trauma clients, but they can offer something that you don't. Okay, and then another thing to think about is, does your state allow 1099 contractors, or do your therapists have to be W-2 employees? So I have had some practices run into this where they hired a bunch of 1099 contractors and then found out it was illegal in their state. And now all of their financial projections and the way they've been running things is all based around paying contractors, and now they've got to start paying payroll taxes and benefits and all of these things that they weren't prepared for. So if your state will allow either, then you have a choice, and then there's some pros and cons. Contractors, they're less expensive. You can just pay them the split, the employee share, the revenue split. And usually you don't have to pay a lot beyond that. Maybe you throw in a few other perks, but that's usually it. Less risky because they're not an employee. And they're usually going to do, you can expect more help with the marketing because they're kind of seeing themselves as more independent, not entirely relying on you. Some of the cons is that they'll probably work at other jobs and you can't dictate their schedules. So that can be a little tricky when you're like, I want to hire somebody to eventually have a full-time schedule, but right now they're just starting out and they can only do part-time, and then they have a second job so that they can make ends meet. And then pretty soon you're in a situation where you're like, hey, I've got you filled up 2 days a week. Can you take on a third? And they're like, nope. And there's nothing you can do about that. And they may just feel less committed to the team. Now, you could certainly build a really amazing team culture with 1099s that overcomes this, but sometimes that is the case. So if you go with a W-2 employee, the pros is you do have more control over their schedule. You can say right from the beginning, like, I need you, 5 days a week during business hours, or you're going to have to work 2 evenings a week, or you're going to have to do a weekend day, things like that. And that is okay to say. Then they'll often be more team oriented. And, but the cons is they are generally more expensive, as you have payroll taxes, benefits, and all of that. You also, maybe paying for more things, your EHR, your, like a Psych Today profile, things like that you might not offer a 1099. Okay, last thing to think about before you hire. Are there any tasks that you want your therapist to do outside of clinical work? And again, this comes back to setting you up for success in the future. Some group practices have set it up years ago with their first hires that they don't have to do anything other than clinical work. And now I'm coming on, I'm trying to help them build their business. And I'm like, hey, it'd be really great if all of your therapists did a blog post every month. And they're like, no, we don't do that. So things like that, if you can set up the expectation right from the beginning that there might be some additional work that you'll pay them for at an hourly rate. So blog posts is one idea. They might do some other content creation, like some social media posts or some videos, for marketing purposes. And, of course, this just helps them get clients. But if they can, throw a reel out every week or even every month, that's helpful. You might want them to do some physical office management things. Like if your intake coordinator, your admin staff is not physically local, then the folks in the office are the therapists. You might need them to water a plant or check the mail. And you'd be surprised how much resistance there can be around this kind of thing if you introduce it years later. Some networking. And I really love to help practice owners get to the point where their therapists don't have to do a ton of networking or marketing activities. Like, for the most part, 90%, the practice is doing all of that and really just bringing in a ton of leads. And the intake coordinator is booking those leads with the therapist. And all the therapist has to do is show up and be a great therapist. Like, that's our goal. But in private practice, there is a bit of an expectation that every therapist help out a little bit, do something, go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting once a month, go to some networking events, maybe take a flyer to a doctor's office and connect with them as a referral source, that kind of thing. So setting that expectation up that, a few hours a month, that kind of thing will be expected is a good place to start.
Yeah, and it's especially the networking, and this is like one of my biggest soapboxes that I preach to everybody is just there is no better lead than a referral lead at the end of the day, right? Like it's just a completely different caliber. And also that with a group practice, like how can you instill a culture where every single person on the team thinks of themselves as a brand ambassador, right? Where like, and that comes, like, I appreciate so much what you're saying. Like it comes from day one is instilling that culture, that expectation in the hiring packet, in the job description. Like part of what you're going to get to do is write blog posts and social media posts and network. And just the more voices you have promoting the business, the better it is for everybody is what, from what I see.
Yeah, absolutely. Like creating that team culture around, hey, we're all contributing to this thing larger than ourselves
Right.
is really great. Yeah. Okay, so that wraps up the 10 things to think about moving from
Cool.
solo to group practice. But I did just want to mention that I have a free live training on the third Monday of every month. I'm doing a retention training this month, but I think this isn't going to come out in time for that. But some future trainings will be on conversions, hiring, metrics, profit, leadership. So just if you pop over to my website, confidentprivatepractice.com, then you'll be able to find what training is coming up next and get on the newsletter list, and then you'll always be up to date with what's happening. And those trainings are free.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that the next one is retention too, because I'm saying like the best way to reduce your marketing costs is to increase your retention. Because if you don't have to get more clients because your clients are staying, then that's extra profit in the pocket because you're not having to spend that money on Google ads or something else. So I love all these topics. And then I had a couple of questions for you, just four specifically that I wrote down as I was listening to you. The first one was, is there, you mentioned like when to start, full caseload, partially full. Is there like, when it comes to that sort of dip, the financial dip that often happens when starting a group practice, because all of a sudden you're investing in more marketing and all of that, like, is there a financial point that you recommend when someone should start even thinking about it? Because I know folks think about it at different stages of their business, but like, do you have any recommendations, like certain amount in savings, certain amount, like any financial recommendations?
I think one thing to consider is I usually see marketing at about 10% of revenue. So like as we're looking at financial projections, we'll kind of plug that number in there. And beyond that though, it's really like dependent on the individual person and where they're at. Some people are single mom trying to build a business so that like this is going to be their livelihood or they're not eating next month, kind of situation. And then other people are like, hey, I've got some time, I've got some savings, I can build, this is where I'm at. I mean, there's so many different situations. And I would say that's where we just need to get in there together into the nitty gritty of your finances, look at your current profit and loss, build out a projection. I have a spreadsheet where I can build out projections for people based on, how many therapists they hire and what their average rate is and what the retention rate is and what their intake coordinator's conversion rate. And it all just plays into one nice little formula that spits out, this is what you need to do in order to hit this goal. So
That's cool.
we can look at all of that together and kind of decide where, see where you're at and see what you need to do.
Okay. Yeah, I mentioned that partly also because that's a question I get a lot from a lot of folks is like, how much do I need to be making to be able to afford the transition? And then another one I get is it easier to do the transition as private pay or insurance? Like if you have any instinct, I know you talked earlier about the private pay, but there's also definitely a market, especially in this economy and world right now, for insurance. So I'm just curious, like, what are you seeing if there's any difference?
Yeah, I just can't speak to the insurance piece too much because, like I said, I work almost exclusively with private pay practices. The ones that have their foot in both worlds usually are moving away from insurance, though I do have folks who, because of the economy, they're thinking,
Mhm.
hey, it's not COVID anymore. Things are, a little tougher now because we did have a big boom, those
Yeah,
couple of years. And yeah, and so they're thinking about moving to insurance. So I don't know if there's one right answer to that, but I do know that it is possible with private pay, and I think that's the thing that people get
got it.
worried about is can I really get any clients if I'm not using insurance? And I would say yes, but that doesn't mean you can't use insurance. If it feels like it's a good place for your business to be.
Sure. Yeah, and the thing with insurance that from the marketing side that we see is when we're talking about our numbers and your cost per lead, cost per client, and when we're looking at the lifetime value, it's like, okay, so if you're already only getting $100 from the insurance company and you have a 60-40 split, all of a sudden that means that if your cost per client is the same that it would be for private practice, it'll never be profitable. And I think that that's a conversation that I have a lot of times with folks contemplating it. And speaking of splits, like, do when I get this all the time in my forums in the community is, do you have a recommended split for those 1099s? Like 60, I
Yeah,
hear 60-40, I hear 50-50. People just, some folks who chime in are like, well, it depends on what other benefits you're giving. So I'm just curious if you have any high level tips on that, on even thinking about that.
yeah, absolutely. So I would say that is one of the pitfalls that I've seen. Usually, when I come into a group practice, the first people that they hired, they're paying 60%, and now they're not hardly doing any sessions because they never set any requirements and they're actually losing money on those folks. So I would say, yeah, starting out a 40% split usually makes sense when you have an associate therapist, someone without a lot of experience. I would say 50% at the most, and then allow yourself some room to give them bonuses or to do a tiered compensation plan is something I like to do. So the more sessions per week, the
Mm.
higher percentage you get. And that's speaking to the other side of that from the therapist, that's not to exploit anyone. We're not talking about making you do 30 sessions a week. In private pay usually it's like 15 to 25, so still very very doable. We want to be very ethical and very caring of our employees and not letting them get burned out because it is a very emotionally heavy job. But if you're doing 5-10 sessions a week, there's just no reason to it just doesn't make sense to have anybody who's doing that. If you're paying them 60%, it just financially doesn't make sense. So I would say gear towards the lower end, and then you can always add in some benefits. As your practice grows, maybe you can start to offer health insurance later if you have employees, and give some room to grow later.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that was amazing. I thank you so much for that incredibly detailed. It's a gift to anybody watching this. Really, to anybody who's considering making that big jump, because there is, and those are 10 things that you chose in this presentation, and I'm sure that list is hundreds long of things that folks should even be considering. And the one that I found most interesting of what you said was to have the intake coordinator in place before doing that jump, because I know so many folks it's like, okay, I hired my first associate or my 1099, whatever it is, but they're still the one doing everything. And just I imagine that it's going to lead to a lot of burnout and unhappy transitions into group practice. And it's so simple, but yet it's to me that was like, I was okay, of course it makes total sense to have that. And this is why you do what you do, because these are the things that in marketing it's like, of course it makes sense when you think about it, but to have a business coach who actually knows these things that you should be thinking about before transitioning or anything like that, it's great. So is there anything else you want to share with anybody watching before we say arrivederci?
No, I think I just want to encourage that this moving from solo to group practice is really doable. You might not feel like you have those business skills. You might not feel like the things we talked about, like you're ready right now. But you can be. You're very smart. You've got that master's degree, that PhD. You've put in the work. You've worked to build your solo practice. And so I really just want to encourage anybody listening who's feeling like maybe they don't have what it takes. You do have what it takes, and you can learn what you don't have. So it can be a very, very profitable, great way to build build something that really lasts, makes an impact on your community, something that's going to benefit a lot of people for a long time. And so I want to encourage you to just give it a try. And if you have any questions about how could I possibly do that, I have a free consultation call, 30-minute consultation call. So if you hop on the website at confidentprivatepractice.com, do that 30-minute call with me, and we'll see how I can help.
Awesome. And if you don't have to remember that, I'm going to drop it in whatever platform medium you're watching this on. Below this video are going to be Emily's links, her website, how you can schedule that, information on her upcoming free trainings. Thank you, Emily. You've been wonderful. I appreciate you. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.